Nothing is more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers you hire. That's why I started First 10. Hi, I'm Boris Epstein, CEO of First 10, and with me is my colleague,
Alexis Munger. Hi. At First 10, we work with early founders to help build early engineering teams.
And this is the First 10 podcast, where we bring you valuable insights on building early engineering teams from all sides of the equation. Engineers, founders, even investors. On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we're going to talk about early engineering for engineers. So here's the setup. We talk to engineers all the time. Here at First 10, we recruit for early startups. And when we say early startups, we're talking about primarily seed-funded startups. 2 founders, a few engineers, all working together to deliver on some very exciting missions, them against the world, very early stage. It's very often that we talk to engineers who are interested, exploring, curious about early stage. Early stage means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Some people have worked in early stage, like seed or A-funded startups. They kind of have a sense of what to expect. Others, this might be their first exploration. So the goal of this session is to talk through 7 tips, or almost like the 7 steps to take to decide on whether early stage is for you. And then if you decide that early stage is for you, which early stage startup is for you. This is from years and years of experience working with early stage startups and recent depth under the First 10 banner, working exclusively with early startups. So we're going to go through 7 tips. We're going to start with 7, then work our way down through 6, 5, 4, 3 to the final
countdown,
the boss tip.
And I think I should point out that this list is not a set of exclusive rules. It's not exhaustive. It's just a handful of tips that we find could be really helpful.
Handful. That's all we're going for.
Handful.
That's it. Maybe,
Couple of tips.
6 or 7 handfuls. Okay. Let's start with number 7. Tip number 7, before you go and throw your resume or throw your kind of, hat in the ring of early stage opportunities, set proper expectations around equity and compensation. So here's how early stage startups compensate. So every early stage startup, when I say early, we're talking about a seed startup that has received venture capital. Okay. So that's like what we're referring to when we talk about early stage. Sometimes pre-seed startups can afford less, but seed startups and then up the respective trajectory. So a seed funded startup will usually be able to afford a base salary that is within some reason of reasonable living for the engineers that they hire. So I'll state a wide range for compensation on the base salary side. So base salaries for early startups could be anywhere from the low hundreds to the mid 200s, let's say. So that's a very broad range because there's a broad range of startups and a broad range of engineering types. But that's the rough kind of range you should expect to pay. So if you're earning in the 300 or 400s as a senior principal engineer at a large company, you might have a tough time earning that compensation package. But if you're a senior to staff, even like a mid to staff engineer, and you're earning somewhere within that range, a lot of startups will pay commensurate. That's the base side. But most people don't go to work for early startups for the base. Most people go to work for early startups to earn a base to maintain their living, but they want that early equity because that early equity is what's going to create the upside. Now, early equity isn't really worth very much in present day value, but as the company grows and the value of the company grows, so does the value of that early equity. Every single great company that we know and love today, Meta, Google, OpenAI, et cetera, was at one point an early startup. And so the engineers that took a chance on working for that no-name startup at that time are doing very well in life right now, at least financially, because of the value of that early equity. So that's really what's the exciting upside opportunity in early startups.
I think that's a really good point. And I think understanding just like the differences between like what's kind of standard for a total compensation package in early stage versus companies who are a little bit more mature, even like Series C, you probably won't see 401k matching for a while until a company's like a Series C or a D even. Probably not going to see a bonus. That's also kind of like a larger company. perk that we typically see. Sometimes they may not have health insurance or medical benefits set up. Not all startups, but sometimes that's kind of yet to be set.
Very true.
So I think it's important to kind of understand like what are some of the things that I can expect, and am I set up and prepared for this before you kind of launch into that interview process with early stage companies.
Absolutely. And it's a good thing to talk about upfront, at least with a recruiter. If you ever talk to us about early opportunities, we very much welcome an open conversation about compensation, whatever the ranges are for the startups we're representing and the expectations that you might have in early opportunities. And we can very quickly level set that, then move off of that if everything looks all right until the later stages when it's time to work through the particulars of any respective offer.
Absolutely. Tip number 6. Yeah, you got to decide if early stage is right for you. I mean, it sounds probably pretty obvious, but the trade-offs with working at an early stage company, they often require long hours. There's a very, very high level of commitment. Work-life balance is a tough thing. You might come across some companies that are mindful of that, but typically at that early of a stage, everybody is working around the clock to create the best product that they can, or whatever it is at the problem space that they're working on. They're very mission driven. And so that's I think it's something that all early stage startups and seed companies typically have in common, is they expect that kind of devotion, is because you basically are a partial owner in the company if you're joining that early. And so you have to have that mindset. You can't have the mindset of I go in, I work from 9 to 5 and I shut my computer. That's not how it gets done. So I think understanding like, is this the right time in my life to kind of dedicate those kinds of hours and that level of commitment, and make sure that that's something that will fit into your personal life. But then also you got to factor in like your own personal risk tolerance. Lots of startups don't make it. Like even sometimes they just don't. Very, very few of them actually end up having like these tremendous stories of Airbnbs and the Facebooks of the world. Like that's not typically common. So you have to understand that there is a certain level of risk, and you may sink in a lot of hours on a product that just unfortunately doesn't make it, or maybe it's not the right timing for it. So those are things that can happen. The other thing is you kind of have to consider, are you the personality type that does okay in the face of uncertainty? You're working in a space that has no definition. You're actually there to create the definition. So are you okay with that? I think these are all like really important factors as you're considering like whether or not I'm cut out for this. And I think it requires a little bit of like self-reflection about what you're, why you want to do this. What's the reason why you want to kind of step into this role, and see if the reason kind of aligns to what these early stage companies are looking for.
Yeah, those are really great points, Alexis. And, for every attribute you mentioned, that's a reason to consider and not consider. There are great benefits to working for an early startup that could be a great attribute to consider. Like, an early startup, you're going to have a considerable amount more impact. You're going to have a considerable amount more breadth of opportunity and scope of opportunity. You have a considerable amount more ownership. There's going to be way less bureaucracy, right? You're going to be, working there with a handful of other people. That's the whole company. There isn't like this department and that department and, that protocol and the other protocol, and your role scope isn't kind of super thin. It's like you're all just, working together to go build something great. And that can create some very exciting growth opportunity for folks that are interested in that at this point in their career. It's also a really great training ground for individuals that might at some point want to start their own startup. You're going to get a very insider kind of sense of like founder life, of startup life, of a number of things that go into building a startup. But the reason this one's really big, and I know we've come across this so often, Alexis, is founders these days of early stage startups. Yeah, they're very excited to talk to people who are excited about early stage and even about their domain. Yeah. They're not super excited to talk to people who are like exploring 16 different versions of opportunity, late stage, early stage, relocation. Yeah, maybe a job change, maybe not a job change. Don't start talking to early stage startups just to see what early stage is like. Right. I think is what we're trying to say.
You'll never make it even to the interview process in most cases. Like we really are filtering heavily up for motivations early on in this case. I don't know if I'm that rigid on it with like maybe even later stage companies like Series C and above. But at that stage where companies have very little people to interview, to help out with the interview process. Every single candidate person that they talk to is very time intensive. So putting a lot of energy into candidates that are kind of just window shopping or maybe not sure if it's right for them, it's not a great start. And I find that founders are very like risk adverse to even kind of engaging with candidates like that. So I think do your due diligence before you hop into those interview processes and really figure out if this is actually something that you want to pursue, because that intentionality will come through in your interview process and founders will be much more interested in speaking with you.
Yeah. And due diligence is like, talk to us.
Yeah.
Like we'll tell you what it's like to work at an early startup. Like we talk to early startups all the time. We'll paint you a very vivid picture of that, or talk to your friends who work for early startups, or ask ChatGPT what it's like to work for an early startup. Just consider those data points.
Yes.
If that sounds like it's right for you, then let's go talk to founders.
Absolutely.
Let's go talk to early startups.
Yeah. Boris and I are always happy to tell you why you should or you shouldn't join an early stage company.
Hit us up.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you've set expectations on compensation, once you've decided you want to work for early stage, some of these tips are going to be a little controversial. So let's just get into it. Yeah. Tip number 5, don't worry as much about the role. This is contrary to very popular advice that other recruiters might share. Don't worry a ton about the role, because startups are a moving entity, right? You're not going to get hired for like a very specific job description, then be expected to sit there and fulfill on that job description over, the entire tenure of your time with the company, right? You're going to get hired to build a product, or to develop the product, or to sell the product, or whatever it is. That's going to be conformed into a job description that sounds about right for today. But startups change, startups evolve. Being able to deal with ambiguity, being able to work within ambiguity, being able to take on responsibilities outside of what common scope might look like, being a general hand on deck to help with a variety of things. Most people that work for early startups, they'll tell you the job that they ended up doing over the life of the time with a startup was very different than what they thought they signed up for at the beginning on day one. So you might get hired as an analyst to do something, and then your job is going to evolve into maybe an executive function, or you might get hired to be a front-end engineer, and then your job's going to evolve into systems work. Yeah. Full stack systems, all sorts of stuff, right? So don't worry a ton about the role. You're going to be a Swiss Army knife no matter what role you think you're being hired into. Embrace a growth mindset, right? You might have heard the notion of don't worry about which seat you're in, just get on the rocket ship, right? That was a little bit more popular in the last decade. It's not kind of as popular of a saying right now because we're not in rocket ship time. But when you join a startup, you're joining the startup to be a part of the team, to be a part of the mission, to do what it takes to see that startup be successful.
I think we should bring that anecdote back. I miss that one.
I miss rocket ships in general. Rocket ships are fun.
Feeling very nostalgic for tech prior to COVID.
Just get on the ship. We've been talking a lot about that, right? Like the way tech used to be, and like
the way tech used to be
4 long years ago in 2019. It is making a comeback.
I hope it is. I hope it is.
Yeah, I heard a
snacks.
We heard a startup talk about snacks in the office.
Bringing snacks back to the office.
Yes. Yes.
On that note, you want to hear tip number 4? It's a really good one.
I'm dying for it.
So also, again, probably super obvious, but I think it's a very important one to say sometimes. You should have passion for the product and the market. So what I mean by that is if you have kind of gone through the self-reflection and the whole journey of figuring out, whether or not early stage is right for you, and you've decided, yes, I'm going to jump into this, I think it's really important to figure out before, you start kind of putting feelers out there, like what market do I want to be in? Do I want to be in fintech? Do I want to, work on consumer facing products? Do I want to do SaaS products only? What products do I have a passion for? Because ultimately that's the thing that's going to keep you motivated as you're working on these, in a challenging environment. You should have like some sort of personal connection to the thing that you're working on. It's not going to be money. So, you can kind of, at least not at first. So you should have some sort of personal motivation to contribute to a product. And I think also on the flip side of that, as you're talking to founders, they're going to want to know that you have excitement for what they're doing and can get in on the mission, what they're trying to accomplish. I think, Boris, you and I have talked about this so much, where we talk to candidates who I think even are like probably great for early stage, but they just don't seem to have like a strong opinions about what it is that they work on. And I've seen that not go over so well in founder interviews, where they're asking like, hey, you know, what is it that you're passionate about? And there's not really much of a solid answer. So I think doing that should also be part of like your thought process as you're kind of going through like, what is it that I'm passionate about? And then I think try and apply it to companies that are doing something about it. That's my tip.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think you hit it on the head. And I think the way this is showing up with early startups is, you know, they'll obviously want to know what a person's passionate about and excited about. They'll want to know if the person's excited and passionate about them. And that's just the beginning of the conversation. Then they're going to want to know, okay, well, if you're passionate about our product, tell us what you think about our product. Yeah. Tell us what you are curious about our product. Tell us what you would be excited to build, you know, within the confines of our product. Tell us, you know, what direction you think our product should go, right? Those are, you know, someone who's passionate and excited about something, they're going to have a perspective on things. They're going to want to talk about it. They're going to want to kind of geek out on it. They're going to want to explore it, right? And those are the sorts of things that a startup is looking for in the people who they ultimately hire, right? And we've had startups, right? And every startup that we represent that's not stealth, that has a, you know, product out there in the market, part of the exercise, just even when we're talking to them, is, hey, jump on the company website, download the product, play around with it.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think, right? And here's an example of passion and not passion, right? The passionate person is going to jump on the website during the call, download the product. You're going to kind of almost see their eyes start to light up a little bit as they're playing around with the product. The not so passionate person, they'll let us know they can maybe get to it in the next week or two. That person's likely not a fit. Could be a great person, but not the right fit for this, right? So check that. You know, are you excited about AI? Oh, okay. Well, what is it that you've done based on your passion? Are you playing around with LLMs? Are you building an app on the side? Or are you not? And so if you're not, maybe you're not passionate about that, which is okay. Maybe you're passionate about something else. Go down that passion. There's so many really cool and exciting startups and opportunities out there right now.
And, you know, as I'm kind of thinking, as we're talking through this, and I think it makes sense if you're a founder and you're kind of looking to build your founding engineering team, I think you want people around you at that point that have strong opinions on how something should work. And so if you like having that passion for the product and having opinions around like the roadmap and how we're going to do these things and how we're going to build this and make this really great, like you need to have some opinions about it. You know, you're not just going to be executing, like you're part owner of the whole creation. So having some really strong convictions and being able to voice that and say, hey, here's what I think we should do. Like that's what they're looking for. They're looking for people to collaborate with. It's not just sitting there and executing. You're designing, you're building.
Exactly.
That takes conviction.
And then examples of that, right? And there's so many public ways to showcase what you're excited about, right? Expand your GitHub profile, get involved in projects that you're excited about, right? And let that be a showcase of what you're building.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to number 3. Look for the connection, right? So when you join an early startup, when you take all the fancy stuff away, the name of the company, the funding, the product, when you take all that stuff away, it's you and like 3 to 5 other people sitting in a room, maybe like it's not, you know, in person, then it's virtual. And it's just you all. And you're spending like, you know, 40 to 60 hours a week together. You don't want to work with people who you don't have a connection with. Forget about work. You don't want to spend time with people who you don't have a connection with. It just kind of makes the days go longer, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, when you do have a connection, right? When it feels like there's a click, when you have common interests, when, you know, you feel accepted, when you feel like you're able to contribute, when you feel heard, right? Those are all things that contribute to a strong connection. And when that connection exists, then you'll feel like you're able to be your best. And when you're able to be your best, then, you know, and you're part of a team where you're all able to be your best, you have a better shot at achieving success. So when you're going through an interview process, when you're getting to know a team, you know, it's one thing to be in interview mode and like, you know, make sure you're answering the questions correctly, but like look for the connection, look for the bond. Does this seem like a person? Does it seem like a team that I'll enjoy working with? Does it seem like a team that will accept me for who I am? Can I be myself? Can I make a silly joke? Can I be as comfortable as I need to be in order to be successful? So look for the connection. We as recruiters will, when we introduce you to a startup, We'll tell you a little bit about them. Then we'll send you off on your intro connections. Then we'll follow up and we'll say, how did it go?
Yeah.
How did it feel? Did you feel like y'all bonded? What went well? What didn't go well? We'll look to tease that out of you and we'll help you be kind of a sounding board through that. But look for the connection. It tends to be very important in the early stage.
Yeah. I think it's true though. You should be interviewing that company as much as they're interviewing you and making sure that you're going to feel like you fit in, like your contributions will be welcome and heard, and everybody deserves to have that where they're at.
Yeah. And we have a whole podcast where one of our guests, like their whole career thesis is like, just look for the connection and follow that. And it served this person really, really well, actually to their first early stage startup that they just recently joined.
It's a great tip. Solid. Ooh, actually, so tip number 2, I think bleeds into this really well. Second tip there is evaluate the founders and the team. So as you're kind of going through, and maybe at this point now you've talked to somebody like me or Boris, and they've kind of talked to you about certain companies that they're working with, and here's who you're going to be interviewing with. I would research the founding team's background, look into their experience, what's their track record, assess what their domain expertise is, assess their passion level for what they're doing. Why are they kind of getting into this? And what's their ability to actually execute on their vision? I think it is absolutely fair to, again, be interviewing them as they're interviewing you. And so I would research the people I'm about to speak with to kind of get a back understanding. And that way you can kind of come up with some questions that you want to ask and ask them about why did they get into this? What's their passion for the product? What's their why? And are those reasons lining up with your why? Does it make sense? Is there commonality there?
I love that. And, coming from First 10, like the whole purpose of our business, First 10 is that there's nothing more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers that a startup hires, right? Often the founders are one of the few engineers as well. And so our thesis says that the stronger that early team, the stronger that early team attracts, right? And then the better that whole team ends up doing, right? Like a better team can execute on a startup way more effectively than a weaker team can on that same startup concept and idea. So we're big believers in strength of team. We're investing 100% of our time bringing in top talent to strengthen early teams so that these missions have a higher likelihood of being achieved. And so when you're joining a startup, you're doing exactly what you said, Alexis. You're making that bet that this team has a reasonable or higher shot of success than whatever other startups it is that an individual might be considering.
Yep.
And finally, drum roll. The final tip is going to be controversial.
Very controversial.
It's going to be a tip that people are going to be upset about. And rightfully so, because in a different context, I would be upset with this tip if I had heard it as well. But nonetheless,
lay it on them.
We're going to lay it on them. When you're an engineer and you're considering an early startup, don't overly fixate on the business.
Ooh.
I know. Yeah.
Okay.
Very hard to say out loud, coming from someone that likes to overly fixate on businesses and then, develop some sort of a, thesis or perspective on likelihood for success.
Yeah.
Here's what we mean, right? You want to evaluate the product. You want to evaluate the market. You want to be confident in funding. You want to have some sense for business strategy and direction. You want all of that, right? All of that's really important. When you get on a call with a founder and the founder's trying to get to know you, the founder's like living and breathing the business and building the product and trying to kind of vibe with you on building the product together, you don't want to ask them about run rate in the first call. You don't want to ask them about their product roadmap. You don't want to grill them about their competitor strategy. Those are all really good things to get to know. And they will likely, come out through the interview process. And maybe at the end of the interview process, there's a good opportunity. If everything else aligned, there's a good opportunity to, talk to the founder about some of these open questions, because for sure they've thought about it, right? For sure they had to go through their diligence to attract venture funding. But overly fixating on that in the early parts of the consideration process is a total buzzkill.
Yeah.
Now, I know that, and founders will dismiss it and you won't get invited to a second interview, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate, but it is the way of the world right now. Now, it's a little bit unfortunate because I know we are coming off a difficult time in technology, and a lot of technology companies, had to lay people off, and people found themselves on the wrong side of, technology employment experience. So it's tough. So we were then trained to ask about run rate, to ask about profitability, to ask about, all these different things. And these things are really important. And you kind of still don't overly fixate on them if you want to work in early startups. When you work in early startups, you want, again, I'm going to say this again, but you want to evaluate the product, you want to evaluate the team, you want to make sure the enthusiasm, the passion's there. You want to make sure that the investment's there. You get the answer on run rate, right? You get your sense for business strategy. And then you kind of have to decide, do I want to take a shot at this or not, right? Because even if all the answers are perfect, there's many reasons it won't work out. And even if the answers are not perfect, there's many reasons that it will work out. You kind of, if it feels right, if the connection's there, if you're into it, you kind of go for it. And then you see if that team can go and do everything it says it's wanting to do, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think to really emphasize, I think there is a time and a place for those questions. And it's usually when you get to an offer stage and they're telling you about what your equity is and what's the potential here. And usually that's when I think it's fair to start asking some of those questions. But to Boris's point, I also think too, even if they have all the perfect answers, that doesn't necessarily mean it pans out. And even if they don't have perfect answers, it doesn't mean it won't. So take all that stuff with a grain of salt, because that early on, it doesn't matter yet. It's yet to be seen. If you're depending upon where they're at with the building of the product, whether it's, they already have an MVP and there's paying customers, or they're just starting to get that going, or they don't even have product market fit, the business doesn't matter yet, because you have to build the product and you have to really care about that part first. And then all the business financials matter. But I do think that, I've seen this kind of go awry on calls where they start launching into that in the first call, and it sort of doesn't go well. So
it doesn't go well. And look, Alexis, this isn't me and you making this up, right? And trying to preach a personal philosophy that we have. This is from dozens and dozens of engineers that we talk to that go through processes like this. And it just so happens, and there is this type of person that just overly fixates on this at the early stage.
Yeah.
They've been trained, or they believe they need to know this information in order to move forward. And for one reason or another, those engineers just end up not working out for early stage.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, maybe there are other opportunities that are better suited for them.
Yeah.
The ones that do end up working for early stage are the ones that are, again, a little more excited about the product, a little more excited about the team. They kind of trust that some of those pieces are in place.
Yeah.
And this stuff comes out through the process. You get enough information and then you kind of just move forward.
Yeah. I think too, if those are the things that you're super concerned about, the financials of the company early on, usually to founders, the way that reads is that you are more risk adverse than probably you should be for an early stage company. You should assume that some of these things even could not pan out even in the best circumstances. So if you're already concerned about it, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it's not the best fit.
And with the many other tips, right? Talk to us.
Yeah.
You could tell us everything you're concerned about, right? We'll help you create a little Gantt chart, right? And we'll put the things you're concerned about in the box that is totally fine to talk about in the first sync with the founder, totally good to talk about through the process, wait until offer, or maybe kind of hold off altogether on it. If it's really important, we can kind of figure out either how to get that information for you. Maybe we could be a liaison for that information.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not even about we had a situation, right, where a candidate was super fixated on particulars of equity, kind of granularly reviewing the equity agreement and all the way that it's set up. And all that's totally fine to ask. Maybe that's a little bit of a sensitive topic. Maybe that's something that if we can get everything that person's interested in, we can go and get the information for them about that, or kind of share what's standard in the market for the things that they're respectively curious about, what to expect, what not to worry about. what to ask from the founder, et cetera.
Yeah.
So kind of help set that person up for success when they're looking for that information.
When in doubt, your recruiter is a safe space. It should be. Like, you should be able to trust your recruiter. If you don't trust your recruiter, I don't know, there's problems with that, but you should trust your recruiter and just say like, hey, these are some things that I'm like concerned about. Like, let's talk it out. And your recruiters can help either get you answers in a very tactful way, or we can, help share what we know. In most cases, we know a lot, and we can tell you a lot of things.
We've at least seen a lot.
We've seen so much.
We've at the very least seen a lot.
Yeah.
What we know, up for debate. We've at least seen a lot. So that was tip number one. Not necessarily the most important tip, but the tip that you want in kind of the order of hierarchy as you're considering an early startup. So starting from the top, make sure you're aligned from a compensation perspective. Number 7, decide if early stage is for you. Number 6, don't worry a ton about the role. Number 5, make sure you have passion for the product and the market. Number 4, look for the connection. Number 3, evaluate team and founders. Number 2, and don't overly fixate on the business. Number 1. Now, of course, this list isn't exhaustive, right? It's not like, if you follow all these tips, life will just be perfect for you, right? There are other ways and other considerations when joining an early stage. So this isn't everything. We thought these were 7 tips based on our experiences, recruiting for First 10, recruiting for a bunch of early startups, talking to a bunch of engineers, some that are super into early stage, some that are just exploring, and some that are adverse to it, right?
Yeah.
Thought this was a really good framework for folks to follow.
And of course, if you're considering these things, you can hit us up on LinkedIn. We'll set up time and talk to you and tell you whether or not, what our thoughts are about it and share our experiences. We're also in our phase of early stage startup right now ourselves, starting First 10. So we have perspective on it.
We are, and it's very meta, hearing about these tips, right? And looking at ourselves through that lens, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we hope you enjoyed, and we're excited to hear your feedback. So check us out. First 10. Bye.
Bye.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Do let us know what you thought of our episode on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Look for the links in the show notes. Both Alexis and I are not professional podcasters, as I'm sure you could tell. We just love talking about early stage startups.
And if there's a recruiting related question you'd like answered, or you could use help with anything hiring related, jump on our website. It's www.first10.com. That's 1st10.com. And we'll do our best to get that answered for you.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. My name is Boris, and with me is
Alexis Munger.
And we'll see you next time on the First 10 Podcast.
Bye.